and Abdurrahman Khan, the Emir of Afghanistan, signed an agreement recognizing the 1,600-mile, creating, rather, the 1,600-mile frontier between Afghanistan and Pakistan that bears the name the Durand Line in honor of Sir Mortimer Durand, and that is recognized by most of the rest of the world as the boundary between Afghanistan and Pakistan. It is not recognized as the boundary by the Pashtun peoples who inhabit southeastern Afghanistan and northwestern Pakistan. It's an open border. Now, that agreement marked the end of a phase of what is called the Great Game in Afghanistan, or that involved Afghanistan. And it was quite simply, as many of you know, I will say this fast, the drive down from the north of Imperial Russia into Central Asia and the move up from the south of British India. And the Durand Line really marked the end of that drive. Afghanistan was recognized as a buffer state, and the British had aided the Emir Abdurrahman Khan. Incidentally, something that you can perhaps use in casual conversation with people is that the Emir Abdurrahman Khan, who died in 1900, is the last ruler of Afghanistan to have died of natural causes while still in office. A number of other people have done both, or rather no, have done one or the other, but none has managed to achieve both conditions since the Emir Abdurrahman Khan. The British had helped him to secure his northern border that is largely along, or a considerable part of it is along the Oxus River, the Uncle of Waters, as it's known in the local languages, as the boundary with Imperial Russia. And the Durand Line became the other side of that football that you see of the map of Afghanistan, of this buffer state. Now, each of those statesmen had a Pashtun problem when they created this, and they solved it with a short-term fix. The Emir Abdurrahman Khan is the person who created Afghanistan as a state rather than an empire or a kind of temporary state, which had characterized the region before that. And he did it good and hard with numbers of people in the country. There were people who lived in an area that was called Kafiristan, that is to say the land of the unbeliever, and the Emir Abdurrahman Khan, using a generous amount of the sword, converted those people, and the area is now known as Nuristan, or the land of light, and light in the view of the Emir. He had a Pashtun problem, and he was never really able to bring his southern and eastern part of the country fully under control. That was a problem that plagued and continues to plague the Afghan government up in Kabul for the century plus that has elapsed since this happened. British India, perhaps influenced by bureaucratic notions of tidiness, created a small region that we now know about. We actually, anybody who had mentioned Fatah 10 years ago would have thought first and foremost of Fatah in Israel and Palestine, badly pronounced. Fatah stands for the federally administered tribal areas of Pakistan. These are 7 small places, many of them called agencies, in which the British effectively left to their own devices and ran, to the extent that they ran them, with political agents. That system was handed over to the Pakistan government, and the Pakistan government has continued to administer those areas in that way. They have become a source of enormous difficulty. As we know, we are learning about Afghanistan, and it is in those areas that the Taliban movement of Pakistan has been born and has been creating troubles on both sides of the Durand Line. So what else is new? This was a situation in which two statesmen, in order to get to a presumably better long-term, solved some short-term problems in a way that has come back to haunt the region and to give our president and his lieutenants a great deal to think about in the evening before they're falling asleep. The second date is, I will spend much less time on, but it is equally important. July 17, 1973 is the day on which the king of Afghanistan, the last king of Afghanistan, Mohammad Zahir, was overthrown by his cousin and son-in-law, Mohammad Daoud Khan, and the monarchy in Afghanistan was ended. My sense is that by doing that, Daoud Khan opened Pandora's box in Afghanistan, and the country has been suffering grievously ever since then. By 1978, Daoud Khan himself was gone. He fulfilled the category of somebody who died violently while in office as the communists made their coup d'etat. The resistance to the communists arose, and 3 years later, the Soviet Union invaded, and the rest, for purposes of this talk and because of the position of that minute hand, is history. So those are two problems. Afghanistan's, the glue that kind of held Afghanistan together was removed, and the state has fallen into very, very difficult times, one period of being a failed state, and pretty close to being that now. I do want to say when the glue, I made a slight error there when I said that the glue that held Afghanistan together, the glue that kept Afghanistan coherent as a state, was weakened, because one important thing to remember about the Afghans is that they love to fight among each other, and it is a question of who gets to dominate that matters to them. But there is no sense of the state wanting to fly apart, as happened in, for example, in former Yugoslavia. The conflict is pretty much within those borders. They're not particularly aggressive in terms of wanting to go and make trouble elsewhere, and that is just to expand Afghanistan, but they are very contentious among themselves. Okay, when we look at the problems and divide them by the two countries, my sense is that one must begin with Pakistan. And I'm very glad that, as I mentioned that to my friend Farid Sadiq, who is sitting here, and I'm watching his gaze to see how I'm doing, he agreed with me completely. The heart of the problem is Pakistan. I think, first of all, it is a problem that matters to us terribly in terms of our hard-edged national security interests, our vital national security interests that we would go to war for, to defend unilaterally without the support of our allies, if we perceive those interests to be threatened.